For 17 years, Steve Harvey had never walked away from his microphone mid-show. But on November 8, 2023, he did something that shocked everyone watching. He stopped laughing, put down his mic, and said 6 words that would change everything. "I need a minute. I was wrong." What this immigrant woman said didn't just stop the show. It stopped a man who thought he'd seen everything. It was a Tuesday morning at the family Feud studios in Atlanta, Georgia. The air conditioning hummed steadily, the lights blazed down on the iconic blue and red podiums, and the audience buzzed with anticipation. This was supposed to be episode 23,014 of America's favorite game show, just another day of wholesome family entertainment, laughter, and Steve Harvey's legendary reactions that had made him a household name. But what happened that day would become the most watched clip in Family Feud history, generating over 300 million views across all platforms within 72 hours. It would spark a national conversation about cultural respect, unconscious bias, and the hidden prejudices that even the most well-intentioned people carry. And it would transform Steve Harvey from a beloved comedian into an unlikely advocate for immigrant dignity. The morning had started like any other. Steve walked onto the stage wearing a perfectly tailored navy suit, his trademark mustache freshly groomed, his energy infectious. He greeted the audience with his signature charm, cracked a few jokes about his producer's new haircut, and introduced the 2 competing families with the enthusiasm that had made him a legend. On the left side of the stage stood the Morrison family from Tennessee, 5 white Americans, Father Dale, a car dealership owner with a booming laugh, Mother Patricia, a homemaker who kept nervously adjusting her pearl necklace, their 2 teenage daughters who couldn't stop giggling, and Dale's brother Rick, a college football coach with arms the size of tree trunks. On the right side stood the Okonkwo family from Atlanta, by way of Nigeria. Leading them was Amara Okonkwo, 47 years old, a woman whose presence commanded attention despite her soft voice and uncertain English. She wore a vibrant traditional Nigerian dress in bold yellows and greens, her hair wrapped in a matching gele head wrap. Beside her stood her husband Chidi, a hospital custodian, their daughter Blessing, a nursing student, Amara's sister Ngozi, and her elderly mother who smiled constantly despite understanding very little of what was being said. Steve approached Amara first, as he always did with the family on the right. "Welcome to Family Feud. Tell me about yourself." Amara smiled, but there was nervousness in her eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Steve. I am coming from Nigeria, 10 years now in America. I work, I clean office buildings at night." Her accent was heavily accented, her grammar imperfect, her confidence fragile. She spoke slowly, carefully, as if each word required tremendous effort. Steve smiled warmly. "A custodian? That's honest work. We appreciate you. And you brought your whole family?" Yes. This is my husband, my daughter, my sister, my mother." Amara gestured to each person, her accent turning this into dis and my into my. From the audience, there were a few barely suppressed giggles. Nothing overt, nothing that would seem cruel if you weren't listening for it, just the quiet amusement that often greets people who speak differently. Steve, focused on his hosting duties, moved on to the Morrison family. Dale, the car dealership owner, was a natural performer. He delivered perfect one-liners, made the audience roar with laughter, and had Steve doubling over at his impression of his wife's shopping habits. The contrast was stark. The Morrisons were effortlessly American, comfortable in their language, confident in their humor. The Okonkwos were trying hard, smiling constantly, but clearly working twice as hard to be understood. But nobody in that studio, including Steve Harvey, realized they were about to witness something that would change everything. The first round began. Steve read the question from his card. "We asked 100 people, name something people do when they're nervous." Dale Morrison buzzed in first. "Sweat." "Sweat," Steve repeated with enthusiasm. The board revealed it was the #1 answer. The Morrison family erupted in celebration, high-fiving and chest-bumping like they'd just won the Super Bowl. They chose to play rather than pass. The questions continued, the Morrisons dominated, and the Okonkwo family watched from their podium, trying to stay engaged, trying to look like they belonged. On the commercial break, something happened that the cameras didn't catch, but that would later be described by audience members in viral social media posts. Dale Morrison, standing near his podium, made a comment to his brother Rick loud enough for several people to hear. How did they even get on this show? She can barely speak English. Rick laughed. Diversity quota, man. Gotta have the African family for the promos. Patricia shushed them nervously, but she was smiling. Several audience members heard it. The Okonkwo family heard it, and while Steve Harvey was backstage checking his notes, he didn't hear it. Not yet. But what he was about to hear would break his heart. The show resumed. Round 2 began with a new question. We asked 100 people, name something you're proud of. This time, Amara buzzed in first. Her hand slammed the buzzer with surprising force, startling everyone. Steve walked over to her with his microphone. All right, Amara, what are you proud of? Amara took a breath. She spoke slowly, her accent thick, her grammar struggling. I am proud. I come to America with nothing. No English, no money. But now I working hard. My daughter, she going to be nurse. We have house. We have, we make good life. It was a beautiful answer. Heartfelt, true. The kind of immigrant success story that should have inspired applause. Instead, there were uncomfortable chuckles from the audience. Not from everyone, but from enough people that it was noticeable. Dale Morrison, standing at his podium, didn't even try to hide his smirk. He turned to his brother and, loud enough for the microphones to pick up, said, "If only we could understand what she's trying to say." The audience laughed, loudly. And Steve Harvey, in a moment he would regret for the rest of his life, laughed too. Not a cruel laugh, not a mocking laugh, but a laugh nonetheless, the reflexive response of a comedian who hears something funny and reacts instinctively. Steve chuckled, shook his head in that trademark way of his, and said to the camera, "Folks, we're going to need subtitles for this family." The audience roared. Dale Morrison was nearly crying with laughter, slapping his podium. And Amara Okonkwo's face changed. The hopeful smile disappeared. Her eyes filled with something that wasn't quite tears but was close. Shame. The deep, crushing shame of being reduced to a punchline in front of millions of people. Her daughter Blessing reached out and squeezed her mother's hand. Chidi, her husband, stood a little straighter, his jaw clenched. Ngozi, her sister, stared directly at Steve Harvey with an expression of profound disappointment. But Steve didn't notice. He was already moving on, checking the board, keeping the show moving with professional efficiency. "All right, let's see if making a good life is on the board," Steve called out. It wasn't. The answer wasn't there. The Okonkwo family had 0 points, and the Morrisons took control of the round again. What happened next would become the turning point. The game continued for 2 more rounds, and throughout those rounds, something ugly began to emerge. Every time Amara spoke, Dale Morrison made a face. Every time the Okonkwo family tried to answer, the Morrisons exchanged knowing glances. The audience, taking their cue from the family and from Steve's earlier comment, began treating the Okonkwos as the comedy relief. When Ngozi answered a question about things that are hard to do with learning new language, Dale Morrison whispered shame, clearly, and Steve chuckled along with the audience. When Blessing mispronounced favorite as Favo right, Rick Morrison repeated it mockingly, "Favo right, that's my Favo right too." The Morrisons were winning, crushing the Okonkwos, and with each point they scored, their mockery grew bolder. Steve, caught up in the energy of the show, in the rhythm of hosting that he'd perfected over 17 years, didn't see what was happening. He was in performance mode, riding the audience's energy, keeping the pace fast and entertaining. But the production crew saw it, the camera operators saw it, and the audience members who weren't laughing saw it. One woman in the 3rd row would later post on social media, "I felt sick watching it happen. That family was being humiliated and Steve Harvey was letting it happen. I wanted to leave, but I couldn't. I just sat there, complicit." Fast money round arrived. The Morrisons had won and they were about to play for $20,000. But according to Family Feud rules, both families stay on stage until the end of the show. So the Okonkwo family stood there beside their podium as the Morrisons celebrated and prepared for their final round. Amara stood with her hands clasped in front of her, her head slightly bowed. Her family surrounded her, creating a protective circle. Steve Harvey, pumped with adrenaline from the exciting game, walked over to the Okonkwo family during the break before Fast Money.
It was a gesture of sportsmanship, something he did with every losing family. "Hey, you guys played great. Tough game, but you represented your family well." Amara looked up at him, and in that moment, Steve Harvey saw something in her eyes that made him pause. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't disappointment about losing the game. It was betrayal. "Mr. Steve, I have a question for you." Sure, what's up?" Steve said in his jovial host mode. "Yes, you laugh when they laugh at me. Why?" The question hung in the air. Steve's smile faltered. "What? No, I wasn't—" "Yes," Amara interrupted, her voice growing stronger. "You laugh when man say, we need subtitles. You laugh when he make fun how I talk. You laugh like I am joke."
The studio had gone quiet. The crew stopped moving. The Morrisons, standing nearby preparing for fast money, shifted uncomfortably. Steve opened his mouth to respond, but Amara wasn't finished. "I speak 6 languages, Mr. Steve." She held up 6 fingers, her voice clear and precise despite the accent. "I speak Igbo. I speak Yoruba. I speak Hausa. I speak French. I speak Swahili. And yes, I speak English. Not perfect English, not like you, but I speak it. English is my weakest language." She took a step closer to Steve, and there was a dignity in her posture that commanded every person's attention. "How many languages do you speak, Mr. Steve?" The question landed like a bomb. Steve Harvey, comedian, television host, multi-millionaire, stood frozen. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Amara continued, her voice shaking now, but not with fear, with righteous anger. "I come to America with nothing. I learn English by cleaning offices at night, listening to security guard talk. I learn by watching your show, Mr. Steve, because my daughter say you are good man, funny man, fair man." Tears filled her eyes now, but she didn't wipe them away. "But today you laugh at me, you make me joke for people, you make my husband feel small, you make my family feel like we do not belong here." The silence in that studio was deafening. Steve Harvey's face had transformed completely. The performer was gone. What remained was a man confronting something terrible about himself. Steve started, but his voice cracked. Amara wasn't done. "In Nigeria, I am teacher. I teach children mathematics, but here my degree means nothing. So I clean toilets, I empty trash, I scrub floors that people like him," she pointed at Dale Morrison, "walk on and never think about who cleaned them." She paused, gathering herself. "I do this so my daughter can be nurse, so she can have better life, so she can speak English perfect and never be laughed at. But today you show her that even if we work hard, even if we learn, even if we try, we are still joke to people like you." And then Amara Okonkwo did something that would be replayed millions of times across the world. She looked directly into Steve Harvey's eyes and asked with devastating simplicity, "What language must I speak for you to see me as human?" Steve Harvey's legs buckled slightly. His hand went to his face, and for the first time in 17 years of hosting Family Feud, he dropped his microphone. It hit the floor with a loud thud that echoed through the studio. Steve turned away from the cameras, his shoulders shaking. The entire production froze. Nobody knew what to do. This wasn't in the script. This wasn't how game shows worked. After what felt like an eternity but was really only about 15 seconds, Steve Harvey turned back around. His eyes were red, his face was streaked with tears, and he said 6 words that would change everything. "I need a minute. I was wrong." He walked off the stage. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every second of the unprecedented moment. The audience sat in stunned silence. The Morrison family looked like they wanted to disappear into the floor. And the Okonkwo family stood there, dignified and strong, having just taught America a lesson that no scripted moment ever could. What happened next wasn't planned, wasn't rehearsed, and wasn't approved by any network executive, but it was the most important television that would air that year. Steve Harvey returned to the stage 3 minutes later.
His eyes were still red, his composure shaken, but there was a resolve in his expression that everyone recognized. This wasn't Steve Harvey the entertainer, this was Steve Harvey the man. He walked directly to Amara Okonkwo and did something that hosts simply don't do. He got down on one knee in front of her. "Ma'am," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I owe you an apology. Not a game show apology, a human being apology." The studio was absolutely silent. "You're right. I laughed. I made you a punchline, and I did it without thinking, without considering what you've been through, what you've sacrificed, what you've accomplished. I did it because it was easy, because the audience was laughing, because I was in performance mode, and I forgot that you're not a character in a show. You're a real person with real feelings and a real story."
Steve's voice broke. "I'm 66 years old. I've hosted television for decades. I've built a career on making people laugh. But I just learned something from you that I should have learned a long time ago. Just because people are laughing doesn't mean something is funny. Just because I can make a joke doesn't mean I should." He looked directly at Amara. "You speak 6 languages. I speak 1. You came to this country with nothing and built a life. You work night shifts cleaning offices so your daughter can become a nurse. You learned English by watching my show, and I repaid that by mocking you in front of millions of people." Steve stood up, turning to address the entire studio. "Let me tell you all something. This woman right here, she's more American than most people born here. You know why? Because she chose America. She fought for America. She worked for it. She earned it. She didn't just inherit it by being born in the right place." He pointed at the Morrison family. "And you, all of you who laughed, you think speaking English makes you superior? You think being born here makes you more valuable? Let me tell you something. If we dropped you in Nigeria, you wouldn't last a week. You couldn't navigate a single day in a country where you didn't speak the language. But this woman, she's been doing it for 10 years and thriving." Dale Morrison looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. Steve turned back to the camera, speaking directly to America. "I need to say something to everyone watching. We have got to do better. We have got to stop treating people who speak differently as less than. We have got to stop making immigrants feel like they have to apologize for their accents, their cultures, their languages." His voice grew stronger, more passionate. "Do you know how arrogant we are? We expect people to come to our country and immediately speak perfect English. But how many of us could go to France and speak perfect French? How many of us could go to China and speak perfect Mandarin? We mock people for trying, and then we wonder why they feel unwelcome." Steve walked back to Amara. "Ma'am, I can't take back what I did. I can't undo the hurt I caused. But I can promise you this. I will never, ever make that mistake again. And I will use this platform, this show, this moment to make sure other people learn from my failure." Amara looked at him, and slowly she nodded. "You are a good man, Mr. Steve. You make mistake. We all make mistake. But you admit it. You say sorry. That is what good man does." And then she did something that shocked everyone. She reached out and hugged Steve Harvey. The studio exploded, not with laughter this time, but with applause. Real, thunderous, emotional applause. People were standing. People were crying. Camera operators put down their cameras to clap. But Steve wasn't finished. He turned to the Morrison family, and his expression hardened. "Dale, Rick, Patricia, come here." The Morrison family approached reluctantly, their earlier confidence completely gone. "You owe this family an apology," Steve said firmly. "Not because I'm telling you to, because it's the right thing to do." Dale looked at his feet. I didn't mean any harm. It was just jokes." "No," Steve cut him off. "Jokes are funny. What you did was cruel. There's a difference, and you need to learn it." Dale looked at Amara, and for the first time seemed to actually see her.
"I am sorry," he said, and his voice cracked. "I am really sorry. You are right. I couldn't do what you've done. I wouldn't have the courage." Dale accepted his apology with grace. But Steve had one more thing to do. "Here's what's going to happen," Steve announced. "The Okonkwo family is coming back. We're going to film a new episode, and they're going to get a fair shot. No mockery, no jokes at their expense. Just a family playing a game."
He turned to the producers off camera. "And the Morrison family's winnings? All $20,000? We're donating it to an ESL program in Atlanta that helps immigrants learn English." The audience erupted again. The episode never aired in its original form. Instead, ABC made the unprecedented decision to air the confrontation as a one-hour special called The Moment Everything Changed. It included the full game, Amara's speech, Steve's apology, and extended interviews with both families filmed weeks later. The Morrison family, to their credit, used the experience as a catalyst for change. Dale enrolled in cultural sensitivity training. Patricia began volunteering with immigrant welcome organizations. Their daughters started a podcast about confronting family prejudices. But the real impact came from the Okonkwo family. Amara's speech went viral, shared by everyone from language teachers to immigration advocates to major celebrities. "What language must I speak for you to see me as human?" became a rallying cry. Universities began using the clip in sociology courses. Corporations included it in diversity training. ESL programs showed it to students to remind them that their accents didn't diminish their worth. Amara herself became an unlikely spokesperson for immigrant dignity. She was invited to speak at the United Nations, at TED conferences, at universities across America. She told her story again and again, always with the same grace, always with the same powerful simplicity. "I am not special," she would say. "I am one of millions. Every person who speaks with accent has story. Every person who struggles with English has journey. Every immigrant who works hard deserves respect, not laughter." Steve Harvey, true to his word, changed his show's culture. He instituted mandatory cultural sensitivity training for all staff. He created a policy that forbade mockery of contestants based on accent, appearance, or background. He used his platform to highlight immigrant success stories. And every year, on the anniversary of that episode, Steve would post the same message on social media. "Today, I remember the day Amara Okonkwo taught me that being a good host means being a good human first. Thank you for that lesson. I'm still learning." 2 years later, Blessing Okonkwo graduated from nursing school at the top of her class. At her graduation, she gave a speech that referenced her mother's moment on Family Feud. "My mother showed me that dignity isn't about speaking perfectly, it's about speaking truthfully. She taught me that respect isn't given based on accent, but on actions. And she proved that one person speaking their truth in imperfect English can change how millions of people think." Amara sat in the audience crying tears of pride, surrounded by her family. And in the back of the auditorium, by special invitation, sat Steve Harvey. After the ceremony, he approached Amara. "I wouldn't have missed this for anything," Steve said. "Your daughter is remarkable, just like her mother." Amara smiled. "You English better now, you see?" Steve laughed. "Your English was always just fine. It was my understanding that needed work." That moment of growth, reconciliation, and mutual respect was perhaps the most beautiful ending to a story that began with pain. The episode taught America something crucial, that language is just one way we communicate, and often not the most important one, that dignity transcends grammar, that humanity isn't measured in vocabulary, and sometimes the most profound truths are spoken in imperfect words by people we've been conditioned to overlook. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Subscribe to this channel for more stories that challenge us to be better humans.
Hit that like button if this made you reflect on your own biases, your own moments of thoughtlessness, your own opportunities to choose kindness over cruelty. Drop a comment below. Have you ever been mocked for how you speak? Have you ever caught yourself judging someone based on their accent? What did Amara's question, "What language must I speak for you to see me as human," make you feel? Because this isn't just a story about a game show. It's a story about every time we've made someone feel small because they're different. Every time we've laughed when we should have listened. Every time we've judged when we should have learned. Amara Okonkwo spoke 6 languages, but the most important language she taught us that day was the language of dignity, and that's a language we should all be fluent in.